what we're talking about as far as a tiered system, we want to be really clear. You don't have to be perfect. And there's a lot of people that have different pieces in place, and you're welcome to download like those blueprints. You can start putting stuff together, or if you're interested in learning about other opportunities to kind of see like how would I begin to put it all together, feel free to let us know. We'd be happy to connect you. All right, so as we are thinking about a tiered system, so whatever you have right now, we're going to be talking about CI3T specifically. So as we shift to this idea of thinking about screening, the message up to this point is understand what's happening at your tier one experience. And if there's places that you want to grow, like maybe you don't have yet a validated curriculum like Second Step or Positive Action or something that you're going to use at tier one, explore that possibility. But the idea would be that any kid that suits up, shows up, and comes to your school, to Cammy's school, to Lynette's school, that we want to have clarity for them on here's everything you need to know to be successful. We want to literally level the playing field for children, meet them where they are. We want to teach them, here's how you're going to be safe, you're going to be respectful, you're going to be responsible, and I'm going to help you build these skills so that you get, thank you get these skills that are going to allow you to become like a self-regulated, lifelong learner. We're going to teach empathy. We're going to teach you how to make decisions, how to get an action plan, how to set a goal, how to do it well, how to fall apart, and know that somebody's going to be there to say, okay, that didn't work. Let's get a new plan. Maybe hanging out and studying with your best friends isn't the best approach. So when we think about this at tier one, part of screening is knowing what's in place at tier one and then having a plan for accurately detecting who needs more than that plan offers at tier one. It does not mean it's a bad kid. It does not mean it's a bad teacher. And screening data should never, not ever, be used to exclude a child. They're used to shape instruction. It's how we become like the Nancy Drew to figure out like, what do I need to do to create positive, productive, safe learning environments for these kids? So the idea behind screening is that ideally it would happen 3 times a year: fall, winter, and spring. It is very similar to academic data, except that it requires no time with kids. So it's not like if Clayton was screening kids in his class or Jeffrey was, they're not going to walk up and say, Kathleen, were you internalizing? Did you feel shy? We're going to talk tonight about teacher completed screening tools. And we literally screen every single kid. Questions that often come up, love that little coworker, Carrie. Questions that often come up are things like, should I be screening kids that are on an IEP, those that are getting special ed? Yes. Should I be screening kids that have intellectual disabilities? The answer is yes. So basically, if the kids enrolled, you're screening them, they're part of your community. And we're not interpreting the why of the behavior. We're just looking to see, and it's not even things you have to directly observe. Do you have reliable current information about this kid's behavior? And you're going to fill it out. And I want to be really clear on this. You are not saying that kid is a stealer, is a liar, is a behavior problem. You're looking to see, do those behaviors occur together and to a high enough degree, because it's the co-occurrence of those behaviors that actually really predicts important outcomes for kids. So you are not labeling a kid. And I really need that to be heard loud and clear. This particular screening tool was originally just the first 7 items developed by a guy named John Drummond out of University of Oregon. He did extensive research to find out like how those items worked. And he learned that total score actually predicted how kids did behaviorally. It predicted the number of office discipline referrals. It predicted the number of classes that they failed academically. It predicted academic outcomes. So then that got us thinking like, wow, can we expand it to also better detect kids that have internalizing issues, shy, anxious, and withdrawn? And so that's what this tool is showing today. Their same 12 items, the way this works is that the district or your school would pre-populate all the kids' names and all the ID numbers. These are teacher completed independently. So it's not coming to a conversation. So it's not like we're going to get around and talk about this. The teacher independently fills out. You think about one kid, you rate the kid across, you do your school. And if you're in a middle or high school, it's not you screening every single kid, every single period. Usually at the district level, they'll say, this is the period of the day, like the period when we're going to screen every in the middle school. So Wendy and I work with the district for years, and they like first period is when all the middle schools screen. Another school that we worked with, like all the high schools, they did it 5th period because that's when all the kids were there. But let me show you a little bit about the screening and how this works. As I mentioned, you're not going to use the item level data on this. You're going to look at total scores. So when you do this, there's instructions, and we'll show you where these are on our website. There's a whole tab with screening, and there's already great questions that have been in the chat tonight about which screening tool do you pick. And we've got some resources to help guide your decision making on that. There is no one right answer, but there's questions that will drive it. Like, do you have funds to invest? Do you need it to be free? Are you looking for kids with internalizing or externalizing? And more than anything, you want to check to see, is that tool valid and reliable for your community? But when you get these data, what you're going to do with them when they get done is you're going to make sure that you score them correctly. Because like those same 12 items on that one that I just showed you get added up differently for when you're in middle and high versus when you're in elementary. And specifically what we've learned so far is that the role of peer rejection shifts to be more reflective of internalizing issues when kids get older, when they get into adolescence. And if you want to go find these resources, here's where you go on our website. So if you click on that ci3t.org, you click on that tab that says systematic screening, the one I'm showing you right now, that tool that I just showed you, you can click and download it. We have another awesome team member who is helping to put together a training manual. It's like if you're going to be somebody that, like if Bree was going to go set this up for the very first time, there'll be resources to help her as well. But if for now, if you go there and download it, there are these coaching protocols that will walk you through lots of detail. The big picture for things that we want to share are just a few things, and you'll talk about these in just a couple moments. When you think about setting this up in your school or district, we want to think through all the details. Like one of the districts that we worked with, they set it up on a secured server, and they have all these schools, and the superintendent has access to everyone, but only the principal has access to theirs. So if you click on their schools folder, you open it up, and there's a folder for every teacher. And this was genius on their part. It's not the teacher's name, it's the teacher's ID number, so that if the teacher gets married or unmarried, that ID number never changes. And so then the teacher opens it up, rates the students, and then it's historical. Like some districts have been screening for like 12 years, and they have at 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring, they have information on every single child. And that fall time point does not happen the day the kids come back from summer break. You wait 4 to 6 weeks, you screen, because you have to let things settle in. You know, it's kind of like from dating to marriage kind of a deal. Beginning of the year comes, you let 4 to 6 weeks pass, you do your screening, you do your winter screening, usually before winter break, because you don't want the screening point to come in January if that's when kids are changing classes, because kids need to have been enrolled for 30 days approximately in your building to be able to have enough time to do it. And then we screen again in spring. So the deal is 3 times, fall, winter, spring. Some of the things to keep in mind is that these protocols, these coaching protocols, you are welcome to them. You can download them and they're in Word documents, so you can edit them to fit your context. But some things like make sure that it's an independent rating. That's how these data have been normed. Things like make sure that like teach people, scroll to the right. We see this often that sometimes like if people pull it up on a screen, they don't go all the way to the right. They might miss the last couple items. And I know people like Jessa, like your district built this entire system. It's just like so amazing. So when you look at it and you think, gosh, how much is this going to cost? This is a free access tool. You build this in your own system so that you're not having to invest in something else. A couple of things that I want to show you, and I love the questions in there about like in the chat about, well, which one should I get? Which one's going to be the best? And people ask me this all the time. And honestly, there is no one right answer. There's great features of a lot of different screening tools. Some have commercially available like companion intervention materials. Other measures different facets of behaviors. Others measure like social skills strengths as well as areas of concern. In this one, our goal in this screening tool is to expand the original use to be able to look for kids with both major disorders of childhood. And what I can tell you right now is we have, as part of Project Screen, other studies taking place, and we've done a series of studies, but I can tell you right now, like those fall scores that are independently completed by teachers, they actually predict how a kid does that year. At the elementary level, those fall data predict how a kid will end the year in terms of oral reading fluency. They will predict how kids do on their MAP reading scores. It predicts how they do in terms of nurse visits and even suspensions at the elementary level. And internalizing, we see similar types of responding. And sometimes there's not a statistically significant difference between kids in the moderate and high risk category at the beginning of the year, which means that any risk at the beginning of the year is predictive of how the kids end that year. And I want you to know that the total time to fill out that screening tool, it's 15 minutes for the building. It's like a teacher can write their entire class in 15 minutes. And usually these are done in regularly scheduled faculty meetings. And one of the things that you'll be able to get out of it, this is an illustration of aggregated data. And this is from one of our district partners that we're working with right now. And so they started screening for the first time in fall in 2014. And so let's keep in mind, that means we've got every year, one new crop of kindergartners, 5th grade kids go on to middle school. So time is marching on over here. And you can see they just screened this last fall, this in the COVID era, and they actually saw a huge decrease in the percentage of kids at high risk for challenging behaviors. And I think a lot of people saw that initially because a lot of us were finding the kids were really happy to be back, and rules and expectations were crystal clear. You are spaced out like this. We're going to wear our masks like this. The procedures were clear. And I think we did a lot as educators to set the stage for clear, kind, and environments that really taught kids how to be empathetic, to meet people where they are. So I can now look at that and look at the percentage of kids at low risk, that's in the yellow, or excuse me, in the green. The percentage of kids that might have tier 2 needs would be in the yellow, and then red is suggesting kids with the most intensive intervention needs. But this is just a screener. So you're going to look at other data as well. I can unpackage this also now by grade level. So looking at those data, if I look at just this table, and if you feel comfortable trying this, look at those percentages. And if you had to make a decision about where to push in to help with tier 2 support, what grade level would you pick? Just think for just a second. And would you please go ahead and drop it a note in the chat if you feel comfortable doing it. When you start with kindergarten, first or second, where do you think the greatest need is? God love you. Look at that. And so now you've got a data-informed decision about where to focus your tier 2 efforts. And you knew that because you got only 82% of the kids, which is still good at, in the low risk category, but tier 2 needs are showing to be the most pressing in 2nd grade. And $20 says if you went and pulled those kids' reading scores, that they were probably struggling in the area of reading. And for a lot of kids, you start to act out to get out because you can't do what's being asked of you. So the nice thing is we can look at that not just for externalizing, but also for internalizing. And prior to systematic screening, we could not find these kids until we had significant challenges. And I have to tell you, as a mother and as a researcher, these are the kids I worry the most about, because kids that act out will eventually earn office discipline referrals, and that will get them noticed. But if we didn't screen, we would literally overlook kids that were struggling, shy, anxious, and withdrawn. And now I have a way. So now, if you are serving in the role of a behavior specialist, a school counselor, a school psychologist, instead of walking around and saying, do you have anyone? Do you have anyone? Do you have anyone? We're done with that. We are literally looking 3 times a year to see which babies might need extra support and what can I do to step in. And remember, it's not you're not referring to say, and they need special education. We are looking to see what information can I use to shape this instruction so that I, as a teacher, can know how to support these kids. And I can, again, unpackage internalizing behaviors now as well. So this is fantastic progress. These are data from a middle school. Check that date. That is 2004. And I'm showing you this to show you screening is not new. This has been around since the late 90s. And the question used to be back in the day was, should I screen? And now the conversation has shifted completely to which screening tool makes the most sense for me, which is great. And now, when this middle school started screening, you can see that over time, the percentage of kids in the low risk category is going up and up, and the percentage of the kids that have tier 2 and tier 3 needs is decreasing. I love talking to this guy. He just retired a couple of years ago. But the guy that was the vice principal when this school started screening eventually became the principal. But right around, I think it was right around 2007, 2008, he's like, Kathleen, my job is totally different. He's like, I used to be mostly a disciplinarian. He's like, now I consider myself an interventionist. And he would look at the kids' grade point average and their screening. And it was used to like talk to the kid, talk to the parent, connect them to supports. And in the beginning, they were suspicious. This was the first middle school to participate in a study of this screening tool. And see that very first bar in 2014 or 2004? So check this out. Look just at that first row. In that particular group, there were 422 kids right here. So check this out. The kids at the beginning of the year in the low risk category, by the end of the first year, they earned 1.5 office discipline referrals by the end of the year. The kids that started off in the yellow, in the moderate risk category, by the end of the year, they earned 5. And then the kids that start off the year, the high risk category, by the end of the year, they earned almost 8. So that fall score actually predicted who got in trouble. And it predicted who got suspended. And check this out. It predicted how they ended the year in terms of grade point averages. So if risk was higher at the beginning of the year, academic performance was lower. And think about it, at the middle school level, those fall data actually predicted how many classes they would fail. The kids that started off the year at the beginning of the year at the low risk, they failed less than on average 1 class that year. The kids that were in middle moderate risk, they failed almost 3. Kids that started the year at high risk failed almost 4. And there was no statistically significant difference between moderate and high risk, which means that when you start off the year with more challenging behaviors, you are more likely to not do well academically. And I want you to think about it. It took the entire school 15 minutes to get that information. Is it worth it? Is it worth 15 minutes of time? Yeah, and that's like a heck yeah, absolutely it is. And so studies have been taking place over and over again. We're still learning through replication that those fall scores, they predict grade point average, failures, office discipline, nurses visits, suspensions, and we learn those same things are happening for kids with internalizing issues as well, with less distinction between moderate and high risk, which means any kid that's showing up at the beginning of the year, the challenge, we got to pay attention. And we're seeing the exact same thing in high schools. And the question comes up all the time. Like those data I just showed you from middle schools, those were for kids that they were rated by their advisory period teacher. They only saw their kids 20 to 25 minutes a day. And that was enough time. And same at the high school. These were rated by one period teacher. And that one teacher's rating predicted how they did in terms of externalizing. And the same was true for internalizing. Again, being able to pretty well differentiate low from moderate and high risk. And I'm telling you all this because it's a very small amount of time to invest on the part of the teacher, but we have to still give them the time. I beg you, bring teachers together, set it up, give them the time, ask and answer questions, and don't just throw it in front of them and say, hey, screen, I know this is gonna work, although you're right, it will. But they need to know the why, they need to know the how, and so does your community. And that's why those resources that we showed you at the very beginning, like what do you share with your parents screening? So like ideally, you remember back in the day, those the letters that went home to parents that says, welcome back, da 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 da. And in those, usually there's something like that says, we will check on your kids' reading performance 3 times a year, or we'll do vision screening, once a year. And then in Tennessee, they even do body mass index screenings for kids. I know I always want to button my jacket when I'm talking about that. I'm glad I'm sitting, and all you can see is from here up. Anyway, but the idea of screening, people are getting more comfortable with it. And so now we're going to use these data together, and we're watching people innovate in really cool ways. These are data a high school principal sent to me. He said, Kathleen, a math teacher mentioned that we have an updated look at trend. And so check this out. This is internalizing, and this is time going down this way. So over time, the percentage of kids at low risk for internalizing is going up. Moderate risk is going down. High risk is going down. Are you seeing that? See how those numbers are going down? And the same was true for acting out behaviors in their school. So externalizing behavior patterns going down, going down. And the cool thing about this is if we just use office discipline referrals, we know for certain would get there eventually for kids that act out, but we would miss kids with internalizing issues. But if truth be told, By the time a kid, because remember back in the day, it used to just simply be 0 to 1, they were considered low risk, 2 to 5 was moderate, and 6 or more office discipline referrals was high risk. In all honesty, by the time a child has earned 6 office discipline referrals, yeah, that's right. And that's exactly right. Like by that time, many people are on the other side of feeling constructed. So screening allows us to catch kids at the first sign of concern. And right now, our team has been working, thanks to awesome district partners, we have been working to develop a downward extension called the SRSS-EC for early childhood. And that early childhood screening, we are learning, and this is also available on our website, we now have preliminary cut scores. And this study is actually in replication right now as we speak. So by this time next year, we'll have other new information for you. These items are different. They're developmentally appropriate for kids in the preschool setting, but the logic is still the same. And if this is something that you want to read more about, just let us know. There's resources on our website. You can literally just print a 1-page, but if you want the full thing, feel free to let us know. And there's lots and lots of considerations on screening. We just quickly blew through one screener. We looked at a little bit of the psychometric evidence behind this, and there's so much more. Like we want to unpackage it to see like what it looks like for boys and for girls, what it looks like for differences between elementary, middle, and high school. And you've got big decisions to make if you're not yet screening, like how will it be stored? When will it be collected? Who's going to do it? What's the expertise? You do not want to screen and then sit on it. Like when you get screening data, and there's people that'll be in your breakout rooms in just a moment, and they are going to show you the different ways that they use it. But that's the feedback we hear over and over again is we want to make sure that you've got a system that puts the data back in teachers' hands as quickly as possible. And in Pennsylvania, I remember 2 of the districts that Wendy and I worked with back in the day when they were first setting it up, they had a system where teachers logged in, they screened, when they hit save, it clicked them to another page and it gave them the 2 total scores. So they never went back to the item level data, which is exactly right because you don't need it for decision making. So there's great excitement on things to do. And I want you to know that your coach will show you on the website in just a couple minutes. Like there are resources on our website, like you could build your own graphs, you could aggregate those. We also mentioned at the beginning that on pbis.org, there's other practice briefs as well. And so we'd love for you just to just bookmark that, think about it. Like, what would you be sharing out in terms of your community, like the hows and the whys of it? And also, as we were talking right now, like tonight about screening the COVID era, this is an infographic that Paloma led with others to really have some clear considerations, which we'll talk about at the end tonight, about making sure that whether you're remote, in person, or hybrid, that we engage in ongoing professional learning together so that we can continue to learn as things change. And we also can make sure that we're using multiple sources of data to shape instruction and screen responsibly. It's up to each state and each district to know your state and local laws about how those data are going to be collected. So in this next breakout room, we're going to introduce you to just a couple of these coaching protocols. We're going to start with this first one, and this is to be used at the site level. So enjoy the next 10 minutes, and we'll catch you back in just a little bit. Enjoy the time. The next thing we're going to do is we're now going to talk about the role of screening. So what we've done so far is we talked about the why of the system and all the pieces. And if you want to organize the stuff that you have in that way, but we just want to create clarity on what is for everybody at tier 1, what's available for some at tier 2, and what's available for very few at tier 3, because we just want a clear plan of what we're going to do with it. And remember that in a CI3T model, there's an intermediate step between tier 1 and tier 2, is that we want teachers to think about what's the simplest shift I can make, rather than thinking every kid that screens in like is going to need to go somewhere. And I remember when people would first start screening, oftentimes they would call me and like, Kathleen, I don't know what to do. Like there's 42% of my kids that need tier 2 support. And I just always say the same thing, take a breath, because those kids were there yesterday. And remember that if it's that many kids that are requiring a tier 2 support, that is a tier 1 issue. So that's where we start. And Howard's on this call. He's been a long-term CI3T implementer. And we're so thankful to have him on our team. But, it is helping people, as he did, to start at tier 1. And even though we're in a race sometimes to hurry up and get to these other levels of intensity, we want to make sure that we are meeting people where they are with their needs, and it's fluid. So like right now, like when I look at this school, and you notice in all these comparisons we're drawing, like it's fall over time, winter over time. And we do that because across the country, we've seen this trend that fall to winter risk usually goes up and then it drops a little bit in spring. So, but this creates transparency to see where I am. Like in the beginning, when they first started implementing CI3T, they were focused on tier one efforts. And you can see that over time, they're showing more responsiveness to their implementation. Similarly here, now, like there's some years like that 2008 year at that middle school, that like I always like when we started looking at their data, I always wanted to say, you know, this reminds me of those weight loss commercials where they say results may not be typical, because that is very rare. That's less than 1%. And I remember this year, like when their risk increased a little bit, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not even sure if this is working anymore. I'm like, let's go pull your fidelity data. And they pulled their fidelity data and they realized that as they had been onboarding new teachers through the years, what had they forgotten to do? Train them, right? So then they're like, oh my gosh, we need to remember to put that into our back to school. So when that's part of their new teacher induction, as part of onboarding new people, and we watched some people do it so beautifully. In the district where Howard worked, there was a woman where she just did this little pre-meeting for everybody that she hired. She's like, we're a CI3T school. Here's what you need to know. And she gave them an option. You can either have it on an iPad or you could have it hard copy, but the expectation in her building was that everybody had it on them all the time. So they knew what to do at tier one, at tier two. So the benefit of these data, of screening data, is being able to look to see, am I ready to move forward in connecting kids to other supports? And how does tier one implementation look? And so that is going to always be my first step. And then the second thing is we want to be able to look at multiple sources of data together. And some people on this call are part of a grant we have called Project Enhance, and I'm so excited, super, super excited. We're building all these cool on-demand professional learning resources, and we're testing them with our partners. And in 3.5 years' time, they're going to be on our website, available to everybody. But one of the things we're building is like practice data sets for people to use, because if these were my data, like if I was a fifth grade teacher, and these are fictitious kids' names, so these are not real kids, I would be looking at like, okay, for my fifth graders, what does reading performance look like? What does math look like? What is externalizing? What is internalizing? How is office discipline and attendance? Because we want to make sure we're looking to see, is the kid a regular attender? Because if they're not, that has to be my first line of defense, because I don't want to say a student is non-responding if they're not even showing up to school. So that's why that engagement piece is so important. And then take a look. Like if you only looked at behavior screening by itself or only looked at reading, you'd miss the complete picture for this child. So when you look across, like this child has tier 3 needs for reading, tier 2 needs for math, tier 3 or tier 2 needs for behavior. And this kid is a major attendance issue. That's where I would start for that child. And there was a great set of studies done by this man that I just so admire. His name's Hill Walker. And he found in some of his work that it doesn't matter why kids are missing school necessarily, but if a kid misses more than 10 days of school for any reason, that puts them at risk for school failure. So we have to pay attention. And it doesn't matter if it's the flu or COVID or whatever. So we have to pay attention. So we want to do data-informed decision-making, looking at the total child. And like if I was at your school and if I rolled into your building, I might have tier 1 needs for reading. I might have tier 1 needs for math. I might have tier 2 needs for my social skills. And I might have tier 3 needs for my behavioral excesses. And so the idea is not 19 billion interventions, but it's integration. So we want to make sure that we're looking at those three things together: academics, behavior, as well as social and emotional well-being. And to help you kind of think through how to do that right now, this is a new brief that we have on pbis.org. And if you want to log in, it's just like some considerations about what to do right now while screening in the COVID era. And as you look at that, one of the main points that we get at in there is use multiple sources of data. So when we talk about data-informed decision-making, we want to get the whole picture, and not just for the kid, also fidelity. So that's why we want to make sure that we're hearing from the teachers, here's what's happening at tier 1, and here's where my struggles are. And it's not to complain, it's to use that feedback from teachers to know how to shape their experience. And in many of the districts that we've had the opportunity to work with through the years, this is where they've built their capacity. And in a CI3T blueprint, those strategies show up at tier 1 in the academic column. Is by teachers doing those as part of instruction, Like if I pre-correct kids to say, all right, before we jump into this conversation, remember, I'm looking for some respectful behavior. What does that look like? And then I might remind them, like, we're going to have some really courageous conversation about some of the social and racial injustices that have been happening. And I want us to remember the idea of empathy. If you see somebody reacting sharply, maybe you could begin by coming from a position of what happened that made them respond that way. So I want you to remember to come with an eye towards empathy as well as equity. And so you're going to show kids how to use these things together. Now on our website, you can go to that same professional learning tab where you found tonight's stuff, and you can download complete professional learning guides to go do that. And I know many of you here, this is what you do, and you're building like on-site coaches. So it might be Eric and Wendy are the go-to people for how to do instructional choice. And it might be Jessa and Stacy are the go-to people for behavior specific praise. And it doesn't mean they're the only two people that can praise kids in a school. They become the coaches. So if I might indicate that I'm still learning how to do behavior specific praise, like maybe I'm great about, acknowledging kids, but it's not specific. Maybe I'm just saying, great job, rather than, I appreciate you logging in on time. Thanks so much for putting your thought in the chat. I appreciate you muting if I'm not being specific, kids don't know what they're getting it for. These same strategies can also be found on the COVID page with how to do these in remote environments. So whether you're in person, if you are in person, look on this website, same place where you found tonight's stuff, and you can click on those. Those are accordions, and you can download those things. I had the opportunity to work with some BOCES in New York, and they did this really cool thing where everybody that supported these large areas, they brought them in and they would train them on like 4 strategies, and then they went out and trained other people. But the idea is that it's consistent, which is great for educators, because if you knew it was like, here's the 8 steps for choice or the 3 steps for whatever, then it's consistent so that you can quickly get those resources in the hands of teachers. And then on the main tab by where it says COVID, you could, under resources for families, we've also started putting together resources to show families how to do these same things in the home setting. So like I, as a parent, how do I do behavior specific praise? And like, how do I do pre-correction? And I guess in my life, and this is my life. It used to be in person, but now it's on Zoom. But I didn't realize like how much I did those things until I had children. And I remember when Katie was really a little girl, and she's 21 now. But I remember one time like setting the table, because we had this routine when the kids were little that we had breakfast together every morning and dinner together every night. And we used my grandma's china for every meal, because she said, save the stuff, use the good stuff every day, because every day is a gift. That I remember like putting down a napkin, and he's like, thank you very much for the napkin, Mom. Thank you very much. And it was like, okay, she's doing good behavior specific praise at 3. She's had lots of routines. And at some points when I would say to them, hey, just sort of, I really appreciate everybody getting in the car on time today so we can be on time to work. She's like, they would, as they got older, would say, thanks for the pre-correct. We're on our way to the car. So ideally, these are just going to be woven into the fabric of how we treat each other, kind, clear, positive. So check out those resources. And if you are in person or preparing to go in person, this is the place where you can find on that PL tab, you can find the downloadable PowerPoints, etc. Big picture, when you're thinking about supporting teachers, they don't need giant, huge, complex interventions. They need very small shifts in things that they can do, not instead of teaching, but while they teach. And so we have like integrated lesson plans to say, use some of these strategies, and when might you use them? David Royer's done some great work on instructional choice, and he's got articles to show like where it can be done. Like you can embed it in instructional, like you could have 3 choices in your Zoom room and have them pick one. Eric Common's done a nice review on increasing opportunities to respond. Grant Allen's done stuff on active supervision. So everything that we're showing you there's a base behind it. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Not that kind of base, but just there's a research base to show you that that is a good use of your time. Small shifts to increase engagement. And then when you think about it, if you've got tier 1 in place and I've got teachers doing these low intensity strategies, even with all that, there will still be kids that need tier 2 support. And that is not a tragedy. That is an expectation. We need to be prepared of that. It's not a failure on the part of a teacher. There are no tier 2 kids. There are no tier 3 kids. There are kids that are going to need a little bit more. When I was, in 5th grade, I remember like I was a little bit younger. I started school a little bit early. And I remember my teacher like teaching us how to use a protractor. And you remember a protractor is like a ruler with a hump. You use it to measure angles. And I remember her passing it out on day 3 of instruction. And for the love of all that is holy, I just could not remember like what to do with it. So I walked up to her and I'm like, I am so sorry. Like, I know you've explained this like several times, but could you show me one more time? And she's like, Kathleen, seriously? She takes like the protractor, she hits me on the head of it. And I'm not suggesting you do that. That is not a positive behavior support to assault a child with a tool, instructional tool. But she's like, she knocks me on the head. She's like, do you have anything going on up there today? And I'm like, no, I got nothing. So can you just show me one more time? Like I needed a tier 2, and she was great. Like she showed me how to use it. I have never forgotten again after that. But I needed one more child than every other kid in that class. It doesn't mean I need to go to another room to get instruction on how to use a protractor. When we think about tier 2, I'm going to invite you to think about this very inclusively. So I just want to tell you a short little story. So when I have an older son, he turns 25 on Friday of this week. Thank the Lord. So full frontal lobe development will probably be happening at 3:32 Friday morning, because that's when he turns 25. When he graduated from high school, like I cleared my deck his senior year. I'm like, bud, good news. I've cleared my calendar. I'm going to present less. We're going to spend your senior year together. He's like, shockingly, that's not what he wanted to do. So Katie's a few years younger. So I told her, as she got older, I'm like, I know this next couple of years is going to fly by. I want to spend more time with you. And she's like, I'm like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, how about we go to yoga together? And she's like, no offense, Mom, but yoga's kind of for old ladies. So no. And I'm like, okay, how about we go to Zumba? So we sign up for this Zumba class at like a rec thing. And I was all doing my thing. And I thought I was fairly stunning. And she walks out and she's like, that can never, ever happen again. And she was like, if you want to spend time with me, you are welcome to join me. And my daughter is a competitive athlete. She's an elite athlete. She's a CrossFitter. So we go into this gym. And I want to be clear, at the time, I was 48 years old and I'd had 2 children. Let's pause on that for 1 second. The first activity was jump rope. Okay, pre-correct should have been involved. Somebody said, let's hit the bathroom before we do that. It didn't happen. But nonetheless, that was the first activity. After that was over, the head coach, she's like, okay, so if anybody else needs to use the restroom before the next activity, feel free to do it now. And I'm thinking, too late, dude. So then the next thing that happens is we're supposed to go do pull-ups. And I've been doing CrossFit for 5.5 years now. I still can't do a pull-up. My daughter gets on that bar and she starts she's doing chest to bar. So she's up here and she's just like flying like a fish. I go over there and I'm thinking, there's no way. And so this guy gets this giant green rubber band. And so I get my foot in here and then I'm getting ready to pull and nothing's happening. So then he puts like a second one. So now I'm like in two rubber bands, like one red, one green. And all of a sudden it is a miracle. Like my chin is over the bar. And it's like, I felt like it was like an athletic moment. It was like an ABC after school special. And then there was like, she's on that wall doing handstand push-ups. And this guy brings out this box, which I later learned is for burpee box jumps. And he's like, I want you to lay on the box like this and just go like this with your hands. And he puts this abdominal mat on the floor. I'm like, what is that for? And he's like, if you lose control and fall off the box, I don't want you to hit your head. And so sure enough, I did it happen. And I'm telling you all those because that is tier 2. He did whatever it took to keep me in that classroom, that gym. Brought in rubber bands. When one wasn't enough, he got 2. He brought in a box. He brought in I have been doing this type of stuff for a long period of time. There was no point when he said, Kathleen, you peed on yourself in the warm up. You need to go out into the hall. That just didn't happen. So as we're thinking in a CI3T model about tier 2, I want you to think about just increasing intensity to help kids be engaged and reduce disruption. It's things like using your screening data to connect kids to self-monitoring interventions, or maybe they need a higher rate of praise. And yes, maybe they do need social skills training, but we want to make sure that every kid has equal access to whatever it is that they need. And that's in these grids, part of how we're going to reduce gaps in performance for different groups of kids is closing gaps in access. And so it is critical that we screen 3 times a year, academically and behaviorally, put it all together to see who might benefit from this. And then anything that we do at tier 2 or tier 3, we want to make sure 3 things we know. Is it happening? Are kids comfortable with it before they start? Because like if a kid tells you a self-monitoring intervention is going to be really embarrassing, they're not going to do it. And then we progress monitor. So everything's data informed. And then we want to make sure that there's a plan to end that support. Like, I have been CrossFitting for a long time. I've had several different surgeries for different things along the way. I'm still using a rubber band, but I'm not using two anymore. And I can get upside down. Thank you. Thank you. High five. And I can get upside down on a wall. I can't do a push-up on it, but I can get upside down. Does that make sense? So you don't want to keep giving the support beyond when they need it. And the same is going to be true for tier 3. And some of the work that Eric Common and Wendy are doing on tier 3 supports, it's things like this. It's fully manualized. I was just in a meeting today with some colleagues that have developed this method, and we're working on creating a new resource. So I'll keep you posted on that. But at tier 3, it's not magic. There's no magic closet. It's still like grounded in figuring out like what's the challenge, what's sustaining it, what's setting the stage for it. And we go in and we meet kids where they are. So in this last conversation, will you go for just a moment and think about what it could be? Like, and if you're not screening yet, there is truly no shame. But think about what it could be. How useful could it be for you to be able to actually systematically check 3 times a year to see who needs more? And in this, I'd like you just to start, if you are screening, start asking yourself, can I get the data? Can I find it? Do I know what to do with it? And if you're not screening yet, how are you connecting kids to supports? So go have a nice 10-minute conversation. I'll see you back in just a few minutes. And as we think about where we are right now, we are in the COVID era right now. And I know some people were asking the question of, should I just stop screening? And I urge you to not do that. Engage in learning. Look at those professional learning opportunities. Continue to build people's expertise. This is advice we were giving people in 2012. And a lot of this still holds true right now. Like, build your expertise, build your structures for screen responsibly. We would never want to like email that. And we're watching people go to amazing lengths to make sure that every kid enrolled gets screened. And we want to make sure that we're clear on what we do and we don't do with those data. They should never be used to exclude a child. So we wouldn't say, you've been screened, you're at high risk, you're not going on this field trip. Like if you're having higher than average acting out, that's not the drill. And to those same sets of recommendations in the COVID area, this is where we would encourage you to lean into what you're doing. We know for certain that before screening got into become a regular practice, we know that many kids experienced very harsh and very inconsistent discipline because people did the very best that they could. But when the behavior became too outside the box, kids used to get referred, tested, and placed someplace else. And remember that the whole why behind the screening is to get a more clear understanding of this entire child. And if you're moving towards a system where you're going to literally teach at tier 1 those skills like self-determined skills, like how to make good decisions, how to show empathy, how to make choices, how to advocate for yourself in a way that doesn't alienate the people that want to support you. It's like those things are all really important. We need screening data to do that. And I hope it's been clear tonight that it's just a screener. So we want to make sure we get multiple sources of data on every single kid. Like you really need to know, like a doctor's office doesn't ask one question. Like when you go to get your blood pressure taken, like it might be high because you're nervous about being there for the doctor's appointment. It might be high because you ran up the stairs to get there. It might be high because you have high blood pressure. It might be high because you're anxious. It could be a million things. So we get more information along the way, and we're going to use that all to package it together. So as we think about moving forward, and if you're in a place where you think, I want this, but I'm not the district decision maker, or I want this, but I'm not the decision maker at my school, I encourage you to also meet everybody where they are. Let's educate people. Let's explain the benefits and hows and whys. And I spent a lot of time trying to think about like what some of the benefits are of what we've all been going through like this year. And I do believe that teachers are valued in all new and important ways. And I love the world focusing on emotional well-being in a really clear way. I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful for this. Like this used to always be in person. And I love the fact that like on tonight's call, we've had people literally from coast to coast and Hawaii. So it is so wonderful to watch people like you just like lean in to try to learn more. if you are interested in resource sharing and or engaging in learning opportunities with us, please feel free to. I'd like to show you two things that are on our website. If you go to that screening tab, one is that infographic that I mentioned to you that Paloma was leading with others. And that's just like something, if you wanted to like take a picture, download it, but like, here's why we should keep going with screening. And here's why we might consider exploring if we're not there yet. And then also, I would love to share with you a little bit more about the work that we're doing around making sure that we're looking at how screening tools are functioning in the COVID era. Because right now, there are no studies of reliability and validity at this, like when it's in this format for instruction. So we're partnering with people from 4 different geographic regions, from kindergarten all the way through high school. And we have asked 2 additional questions, like, how are you supporting these kids? Like, is this kid receiving instruction remotely, hybrid, or in person? And is the child a regular attender? So we will be doing the reliability and validity analyses specifically to see, is it still functioning in the same way? And even pre-COVID and even before everything else happened, we already had written a grant to do what is called bias analyses to see, do those scores function differently for boys and girls, for younger, like elementary, middle, and high, and for kids that have different racial and ethnicity backgrounds. We're not doing anything with poverty because those data are HIPAA protected data. But we're going to let you know what we learn. And we want to thank the people that are on this call, so that we want to make sure that we are unpackaging it so that we can accurately detect who needs more. But the thing to remember tonight is that if you don't screen, you will for certain miss kids with internalizing issues. And across the world right now, this is a time with a lot of insurgencies, and we want to pay attention to that. Although I've been very, very impressed to see that behavior screeners actually suggest, at least from the data from fall, suggest that things are in a pretty clear position right now, that the expectations are being taught, they're being practiced, they're being reinforced. And we hope that as you're thinking about the practicalities of screening, the thing to keep in mind is that you pick one, invest, do it in fall, winter, and spring. And some people have asked the question, should I be doing 2? Like, should I screen kids with this screener? And then if they show up as having concerns, should I screen again? And the answer is no. You would get additional information. Like, you could get information like on where there might be additional challenges, but we wouldn't do 2 consecutive screening drills. Because remember, it's just that little temperature check.